Hello, and welcome back. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Dentistry Talks. We're joined today by Angharad from personal finance website This Is Money and regular contributor to the This Is Money podcast. From that intro, you might have guessed that today's focus is all things money. What should you be doing with it? What is the pension gender gap? Are young people really as doomed as the media makes them out to be? Angharad covers it all, offering her expertise and advice aimed at keeping dental professionals financially literate and answering all the questions you might have. From scams and student loans to misconceptions and top tips. Stay tuned. Well, hello.
Hi.
Thank you so much for giving up some of your afternoon to be here today.
Thanks very much for having me.
We are going to be talking about money. We haven't had a podcast on this before, so I'm very excited to get stuck into this. Lots of things we can cover. It's quite a broad topic, so we're going to try and keep it as focused as we can
as much as possible.
For those watching and listening. I think a good place to start would be misconceptions surrounding money. I think there is a lot of misunderstanding surrounding how to finance your life, how to save, how to budget, what you should and shouldn't do. But in your opinion, what is the biggest misconception when it comes to money?
I think there are quite a few.
Mm-hmm.
I think the main one is that it's not important to think about.
Okay.
Which I know kind of to most people probably go, of course it's important, everyone thinks about it. But in terms of the kind of saving side, you know, the pensions, you know, all of that kind of what some people would think are quite dull topics. But it is really important. And I think, you know, over the past few years, we've come to realise that with the cost of living.
Yeah.
We all know far too much about interest rates, inflation, you know, all of that stuff. So I think that is a really, really big one. And I think, you know, especially kind of within this industry, if you're self-employed, it's kind of more important than anything is budgeting and understanding where your money goes, where it is when you need it in an emergency.
Yeah.
And I think to go on from that, I think it's hard. And I would say that, you know, writing about this all the time.
Yeah, of course.
But I think it's probably easier than ever to learn about money, to learn about how to budget, about how to save, what a pension is, that sort of thing. And I think in a way that sort of works against a lot of people because there's almost too much information.
I was actually just about to chime in and say that I think the internet is wonderful for so many reasons in that you do have a wealth of information at your fingertips to access in whatever situation you're in, both within the money side of things and just generally. But I do find that can, I'm speaking from personal experience, you can get into a hole in the same way that people can Google symptoms, which they always tell you not to do.
Yes.
I feel that can also be applied to this side of things where you almost look into it too much and you can just work yourself up into a stress. Is that are you seeing more of that, do you think?
Definitely. Definitely. And I think, you know, it's so personal to your specific circumstances. You know, no one person is going to be in the exact same position as you. You might be saving for a house, another person might be saving to restore their house, you know. But those sort of things, it's really difficult, which is why there's a whole industry of financial advisors, financial planners, personal finance journalists, you know. It's such a huge industry, and I can completely understand why some people just go, I'm going to bury my head in the sand.
Yeah.
I'm not going to bother thinking about it, which, you know, I've been there. I totally understand it, but it is really, really important, even if it's just, you know, saving £20 a month into a savings account. And I think that's another kind of misconception that people have is they earn too little to put money away. And that's something, you know, I've fallen into that trap and thought, well, you know, what's an extra 50 quid a month? When actually the power of kind of something called compound interest, which is essentially the interest that you earn on your interest. So, for example, you put away £100 a month, you earn 1% interest. The next month, you're earning 1% interest on £101. And it kind of, you know, sort of snowballs. It takes time, but it's really, really important to kind of get into the habit of saving.
Absolutely.
Because I think once you can put £300 away, it's just automatic. So come payday, it's just something that you do, and then you can kind of get on with your life.
Yeah, I guess it could be if you kind of have a standing order set up, potentially it could kind of be treated the same way that, I mean, all dentists will well, actually, I say that some may not, but a lot of dentists will have a student loan, debt that they will have their 5 years worth of it compared to, we've established now we're both history graduates. So our 3 years, I don't know, maybe you have a master's and that would maybe potentially add something else on. But so that kind of just gets taken out automatically. So you can kind of treat it in a similar fashion if you don't really think about it. It can just kind of come away from your paycheck on payday, and you're like, okay, you have to worry about actually. Sometimes that's scary. Actually doing it yourself.
Yeah, totally. I think there's something so psychological about money and the sort of things that you're willing to pay for and the things that you're kind of willing to.
It's true.
I am very guilty of that. But I think you're right. I think kind of having an automatic thing, first of the month it goes in, and I think it's so much about habit. And it might be the first thing to go, when you, I don't know, something happens and you can't put in as much. Of course you can drop that down, but you'll be in a position where you can just put in 50 quid a month or whatever. And it's, it's a safety thing, I think. It's nice to know that if anything were to happen, you had to take some time out of work or whatever it is, that you can then kind of fall on this sort of
cushion of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, definitely. There's going to be a lot of people tuning in who may be wondering, like, when is the right time to start that? In your opinion, is there a right and wrong answer to that question?
I don't think it's ever too late to start saving or investing or even just kind of thinking about money more generally. I think obviously the earlier you start, the more benefit you'll see, because if say with a pension, for example, you're putting in 5% or whatever, that is only going to grow with time. Once you kind of hit 40, 50, you're probably going to have to bump that up a little bit. But the main thing is that you're thinking about it. And I think that is ultimately the most important thing. If you kind of bury your head in the sand, that might be where you kind of find yourself. Yeah, exactly.
I had this conversation recently actually with friends, because it actually came about funny. I went to Vietnam with my sisters and my partner last year, and we were on a bus to we were on a tour, and there was somebody from America on there, and we got talking to him. He was traveling by himself, and he actually just looked my sister in the eye and just asked her how much money she earned, which I think everybody who's British can agree with that's not something that we do here, and that's not me saying that's the wrong thing to do. It's just a cultural difference.
Totally.
And that I've noticed it comes up a lot, and we are quite rubbish at talking. I'm not necessarily saying we should all broadcast our salaries to each other necessarily, but I think it really hones in on that point of we aren't good at talking about money. Do you think that should be encouraged more, maybe within dental teams, again, moving away from the salary example, but just talking about saving money and pensions and investing? Do you think those are conversations that should be had within the profession?
Definitely. And I think, I'm probably the wrong person to ask because it's all I talk about. And I'm constantly saying, to my sister who's younger than me, have you looked at your pension? Have you looked at your savings? And constantly talking to my friends about it. But I think it's a generational thing. I think there's a real kind of stuffiness of, it's just not what you do. It's like you don't ask a woman her age, and those sort of really old-fashioned kind of things. So I don't know. It really depends. But I think in the workplace, it obviously does get a bit more difficult. I think if you're down the pub with your mates and you go, look, I'm having this tricky situation. So you don't have to talk about your salary with your colleagues, but, asking them, is this the right thing to invest in? Yeah. I've got a financial advisor, blah, blah, blah. I think there needs to be more of a conversation around sort of, I think what people call sort of financial health and kind of checking in with people. And I know lots and lots of companies have moved into that and, have got money coaches and that sort of thing. And that is obviously maybe bigger businesses where they can, afford to spend money on that. But I think having a sort of general chat about, did you know that these resources are available to you? You can get advice, even if you're earning at the start of your career and earning not a huge amount. And actually then when you progress, there might be tax reliefs that you could be. So I think, you know, especially talking to people in the same industry that have gone through presumably the same thing, I think it's really, really important, I think.
Yeah, I would agree. I just, I think, do you know what? These conversations probably are being had among some, like I said, not necessarily colleagues, but people within the industry. And, you know, you might have somebody you went to university with who works at a different practice, and they may now say, oh, you know, what are you doing about your pension? How, you know, how much are you paying in? Is this a good idea? Is this isn't? And I think we are quite different to a lot of other cultures and countries in that sense, in that there is, you're right, is a bit of a taboo topic.
Totally.
In a sense. So I think breaking that down and allowing a bit more transparency and just being a bit more like candid with it, I think is a healthy thing, and we could take a note from other countries on that sense.
Totally. And it's kind of baffling to me that we're so kind of bizarrely kind of uptight about talking about money when, you know, come budget day, all anyone wants to talk about is how much tax am I paying? How much pension relief am I going to get? You know, all of those things that are really, really important to your everyday life. So then when it comes down to how much money are you making? How much do you save a month? It should be, you know, we should be having the same level of conversation.
Absolutely.
I think.
Absolutely. We had a call before today, and we went over a few topics we could talk about. And one thing you said that really stood out for me that you thought would be really relevant for today is scams.
Yes.
And I thought that was very interesting, because it wouldn't be the first focus that would come to mind when I think about dentistry. Obviously, you're the expert here, and it was good, obviously not good, but like it was, it was a surprise to me that was something that you felt would be useful for the conversation today. So, yeah, would you mind going into that a bit more for us, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we're all sort of aware that scams are on the rise. I kind of read all sorts of things about scams, and, you know, they are getting clever and clever, and they are using social engineering, and the access they have to our information is really worrying. And I think it's often the elderly, but it's often people that are really busy and don't have a lot of time to look through sort of texts or, you know, information. And there was one thing that I wrote recently about a man who had his own practice in London, and he was called by one of his suppliers, long-standing relationship, really trusted him. And they said, oh, you know, we've had a fraud on our side. We need to change the payment details, and you need to pay over the phone. And this, I know, and you'd kind of think, well, you know, I've got a relationship with them.
Absolutely.
Why would I not sort of?
I mean, I said to you as well. I absolutely. It doesn't. You know, it doesn't matter whether you're an older person, young person. It's in that moment they take advantage of your vulnerability and your trust in that. So I totally see how that could happen. But sorry, continue.
I mean, thankfully, he was too busy to even kind of send him the money, and that was kind of one of the benefits. But he could have lost, I think it was £3,000, which is a lot of money.
Yeah.
And thankfully, you know, he was suspicious, flagged it with his bank and all of that stuff. But I think in that moment, you sort of start to question your judgment. And I think when you're so busy and you've got 1,000,001 things going on, running a practice, and, you know, various other things going on in your life, it's so easy to just go, well, I've got a relationship with them already. It's like when, you know, the bank calls you and says, you need to transfer money, of course, because I trust you. And it's all about that sort of trust thing. And I think the worrying thing is that in this example, and, you know, countless others with this kind of supplier scam, is they have all of the details. They knew who his supplier was. They knew the bank sort code. They knew the kind of all of that. And it's, you know, I can imagine if you're running a practice, you go, hang on, how did they get that information? Which is scary, but they manage it.
Yeah. I think as well for dental practices, obviously, if you're a practice principal, so you own and you run, it is a high cost business. So you've got a lot of big expenses when it comes to equipment, and you've got to think about like decontamination and like water lines, and there's all these elements to a dental practice that honestly, I don't, and like people, hats off to those who run a dental practice. It's super stressful, the regulations you've got to keep up with, not least actually treating the patients and making sure they get the treatment that they need and deserve. It's really stressful. So in that moment, there's big sums of money that they will be spending quite regularly. Yeah. So it's very well thought out, the scammers and people doing this, like sort of running these schemes, because they know that. And it must have worked somewhere else. Otherwise, they wouldn't be trying it. They're only going to continue doing it when they have a success from it, I can assume.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a really good point about the kind of sums of money. And quite often, if you have monthly outgoings, you probably don't check them that regularly, right? Because you know that X amount is coming out. And it's only kind of after the fact that maybe you realise, at which point it might be too late for you to kind of flag with your bank and kind of get it back.
Yeah.
I mean, thankfully, the banks tend to reimburse, which is good, but it really, really depends on the kind of situation.
The 3 words that I feel people are really bored of hearing, but it's still super relevant, is cost of living. I'm sure you must be so bored of typing those 3 words out at work.
Absolutely.
It's necessary, but
Totally.
it's a phrase that's obviously widely used and has been for the last 2 or 3 years now. Obviously, with that in mind and just the current climate in general, there's a lot of articles and features and just general discussion around how doomed young people are financially, how this is the worst it's ever been. And everyone says, oh, young people always doomed. Every generation of young people are told they're the doomed generation, and then actually the next one's just worse. So, but do you think there is truth in that?
Yes, I think look, the kind of cost of living, it's, to lots of people, it's probably a bit dull, and they're probably okay, they can pay their energy bills this year. And actually, kind of anecdotally speaking to friends of mine, I don't know if I count as young in this, but I'm gonna take it. It feels like it's getting harder, because those sort of prices, you hear so much about inflation and it coming down to 2%, but actually it's been so high for so many years that those price increases are now baked in. Your kind of pint at the pub, which is probably reaching £7, that's not going down. That's the price now. And I think it's really difficult for young people because we don't have security. Earning less, which means it's even more difficult to save. You're having to spend more on bills, on travel. Wages have stagnated. It just isn't as easy as it used to be. And I think, the dream of owning a home and that sort of thing is, really honourable, and kind of hats off to young people that can. But for lots and lots of people, they're kind of stuck in this renting, and it's really difficult. So I understand why sort of young people just go, I don't even want to think about it. And in a way that kind of makes it almost worse, because if you're not able to save, or you don't want to save, you don't want to think about it, that can actually put you in a worse position. Because I don't know, say something happens, your car breaks down or something like that, you're kind of stuck, then you're living in your overdraft and that sort of thing. And I think on top of that, you've got student loan repayments, which is another 9% graduate tax. If you've done a master's, an extra 6%. And it's coming out of your salary, but that is a lot of money out of your pay packet.
Do you know what? We were sold a lie.
We really were.
When we were told that wouldn't be noticeable. And I guess there is truth in that it's not noticeable, in that you don't actually see minus XXX or whatever it is that's on there come out, because like you said, it's already taken away before you even see your salary come in. But it's significant. When neither of my sisters went to university, and I think my younger one, well, they're both younger than me, but one of them sometimes says, I wonder what it would have been like if I'd gone. Sometimes I think about it, but then I'm like, but look, you don't have to, and whilst they're none the wiser, if you compare somebody on an equivalent salary who did go to university, it can be significant, particularly as you start to climb up in your career, and you naturally might start to get pay rises, and you start earning more. That becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, and soon enough, it's a significant difference to those without a degree. And obviously, dentists, you can't be a dentist without going to university.
Absolutely. I think it's billed as a graduate tax, and it absolutely is. But I think lots of people would probably rethink that decision. But as you say, within dentistry, it's not really an option. So I imagine for people starting out, they've got this kind of horrible pile of debt, essentially. And it's really daunting. So you've kind of got that, and then you've got to think about, how am I going to pay my rent this month? How am I going to pay my bills? And then on top of that, I'm being told I need to save X amount a month. I want to, buy a house. I think it's not helped by the fact that a lot of, I'm probably going to annoy a lot of people by saying this, but a lot of the kind of attention, especially sort of from politicians, is on homeowners or people with kids, and that's all really, really relevant and totally, but we should be thinking about people's finances from a lot earlier, I think.
100%. I think especially nowadays, like we've just established, that it is really tough. I can't quite remember how much times their salary people are now having to spend to afford a mortgage or a deposit. I can't quite remember the statistic for that, but it's when you compare it to how it was 20-30 years ago, it is so wildly different. It's just a whole different ball game, and you can't argue with that. That is just how it is. I think in dentistry as well, obviously I think historically dentists and in particular, and we can talk about the other team members as well, but let's focus on dentists for a second. People kind of think of it as quite a lucrative career, and I'm not denying that, and I don't think those tuning into this would deny that either, but it is still quite different to how maybe it was once. It's probably quite wrongly perceived in that way. It does have a lot of challenges, and I think social media as well has a lot to answer for where it comes to people wanting to achieve similar things to those they see. So this may surprise you. There's a dentists and dental professionals. There's huge following on socials, big accounts, people with lots of followings, both public, sort of consumer-facing and profession-facing. And it's basically just like an online CV now for a lot of people. They showcase their work. Spoke to one dentist, 90% of his patients come through social media, through Instagram. Yeah, so it's a real business tool, both for those who are self-employed associate dentists and practice principals. So you can kind of, there's a lot of pressure, I think, for people to be not only doing a lot in their career, but earning a lot of money sometimes, which I think can also add to that pressure of doing what everyone else is, and I've got to do this, and I've got to buy a practice by the age of this, otherwise I haven't made it. And that, you know, I'm not saying everyone needs to get the violins out, but like that can be really stressful in dentistry. And to see that, you know, everything's out on display in social media, and it's something that wasn't around even 10 years ago, and it's changed. I think it can be really like sort of detrimental to people's mental health as well.
Yeah,
in that sense.
Yeah, I'm sure. I think social media is a difficult one across, you know, every sort of aspect of our lives. And I think the kind of, on the money side, you know, there is the, I want to get to a certain career level, you know, own my own practice, that sort of thing. There's also the kind of flashy, I earn X amount and all of that stuff, which, you know, lots of my friends have done, and they do X amount of holidays a year, and that's all brilliant. But I think we all have to remember, to go back to kind of my first point, it's really personal to who you are, how much you're earning, the situation that you're in. You might be caring for elderly relatives or taking a career break because you've had kids. You know, there are so many different sort of situations that you might find yourself in, on top of the fact that it's really, really difficult at the moment. You know, it might be that you're earning more than the average person. That doesn't mean that you're not still struggling. I mean, obviously not in the same way that lots of other people are, but perhaps you got a mortgage a few years ago, and now actually the rate's gone up, and you're finding it more difficult. You don't want to upend your life and your family, but it's a really, really difficult time. So I think always kind of reaching out and like finding advice from professionals is always a really kind of good idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
In that scenario.
Absolutely. Just to go back to the student loan focus that we were discussing earlier, a lot of people will probably be aware of, you know, whether it's sensible to pay it off or whether you don't. But just for the sake of this conversation, is that worth doing? So if people had the money to pay off their student loan or some of it, in what is that worth doing? And if so, in what circumstances?
It's really difficult to kind of give a general answer. It's so dependent on what plan you're on. You know, if you went to sort of uni pre-2012, and then if you kind of paid $9,000 a year, that sort of thing. I think in general, it's not a good idea, especially if you're young, you've just started out. You maybe are earning just slightly above that threshold. You know, you might get a bonus that you want to put into it. I completely understand why that interest is crazy.
Yeah, it's gross.
But I really, you know, the system isn't quite set up for it. The whole point of that system when it was set up was that, well, we were told that, you know, you wouldn't see any of it. You know, you'd see a marginal amount coming out, and it's essentially a graduate tax. And it is. So, you know, you earn over a certain threshold. It's a percentage of your earnings. But I think if you are young and you are not earning that much, I really, really would not recommend. Obviously, it's completely dependent on what you think is best. I think I would be tempted to do it if, say, I had £1,000 left and I maybe had like a big bonus, or, you know, I'd saved a little bit and I just wanted to get it over and done with. Totally understand. But I think if you've got years left, I mean, it gets wiped. It gets wiped up. Is it 30 years, 40 years, something like that? So I think lots of people just won't, and it will just sit there, and the government will have to deal with that debt. So, I mean, it's not something I've ever thought about doing. I think if I had a lump sum, I would put it into a pension or an investment account.
So that was kind of my next point. If for whatever reason somebody found themselves inheriting maybe a significant sum of money, for the sake of this conversation, let's say like £20,000, and your advice would be perhaps use that elsewhere before you start to tackle that student loan, essentially?
I think so. I think it depends where you are in your sort of money journey. If you already have savings, then maybe kind of look towards putting it to like a deposit for a flat or a house, or, you know, what else would you use it for? I mean, just kind of have it, investing it, you know, into an ISA, I think is a much better use of it, because it will sit there and it will gain money over a period of time. If you're paying off your student loan, it's just kind of gone. It's so depressing. You don't have anything to show for it.
Yeah, that's
exactly.
so true.
Apart from a great education.
Yeah. No, to be fair, like we met, dentists definitely necessary. History is that wonderful degree that allows you to do anything. And nothing.
Yes, absolutely.
It's actually quite interesting though when I look at. I've got quite a few of my my uni friends have gone into law, which is quite classic. I don't know if you found that as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's very diverse. Some in finance actually.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm making a joke, but it's not as it can be. Yeah, it's useful.
Justice for history graduates.
Yeah. Apologies for those listening who can't relate to having such a useless degree. No, I'm joking. I think it'd be good to talk about women in finance. So women, the majority of people working in dentistry are women. Majority of dentists are women. Large majority of dental hygienists, dental therapists, and dental nurses are women. And I think the dental nurse element in particular finds itself working well with women because it's quite good part-time, and those who have children and need to look after their children, it can complement that lifestyle quite nicely. So it just means that there is a high percentage of women working in those areas. I've got some statistics here that I read when I was just sort of looking around this topic, and I'm just going to read some out. So this was from an HSBC survey report, whatever we would have called it, that came out March this year. It said 2 in 3 women, so 69%, don't feel confident about investing money. 1 in 4 women, so 27%, say they don't invest because they don't know enough about it. Over a third, so 34%, do not have any savings. And just to kind of give you that comparison to men, 2 in 3 women, so 63%, say they do not know how to begin investing, versus 46% of men. So it's quite... I actually thought the male statistic would be lower than that, but that was still quite different. So you're talking 63 and 46. Why is this? What? How has this happened? I mean, it seems very obvious question, because I always feel that there's a lot of socioeconomic reasons as to why, and as usual, women are usually, it's just a classic. It's a tale as old as time, really. It's not going to surprise people, sadly. But yeah, what do you think is what are the currents running through these statistics?
I think. So what you kind of refer to is what people kind of call the investment or the pension gap.
Yeah.
And as you say, it's so dependent on, we talk a lot about the gender pay gap, and that kind of feeds into this whole topic. And I think a lot of it is because, people have taken time out to raise a family or to care for relatives. So I think there is a sort of almost a kind of element of, I don't really need to think about it. I'll put it off and deal with it. But I think to go back to those statistics, the confidence thing is something that comes up in every survey that people do on this topic. And something that kind of analysts and whoever it is that kind of runs these surveys say is women are just, they're risk averse, which...
Are they saying naturally?
Yeah.
Okay. Which
I have issues with because I think it's actually more risky to just go, not dealing with it.
Very good point.
I actually think to kind of sort of go through life and just go, everything will sort of sort itself out, which I'm sure, majority of these women don't think that.
Yeah, of course.
And I really do understand. I think the industry in general, it's getting so much better, but investing in general is really confusing.
Yeah.
And I think almost the sort of platforms that offer it, the people they're going after tend to be sort of higher net worth individuals that are earning over a certain amount, which tend to be men. So it's going to be skewed more towards men. But I think the risk thing is interesting. I don't agree. Maybe I'm completely wrong.
No, I don't think you are.
But I think there is definitely a confidence issues, and sort of anecdotally of my friends, majority of the guys will talk about money in some way. The women are more reserved about it, maybe because they think they don't know enough. They know a little bit, but they don't know enough to kind of fully jump in and go, okay, I'm going to invest in this fund, this fund, this fund. And I think, you see that sort of across the board in like how people, I can't remember what it is exactly, but when there's requirements for a job and there's 5 of them and men will apply if they only have 2, that sort of thing. And I think it's the same with investing I know that this is what a fund does. And that's about it. I mean, that's more than most people.
Well, yeah.
So,
definitely.
I think more women need to kind of jump in, and I think it's not their fault. I think platforms, companies, they need to do more to kind of break it down. It's also, my job to do that as well, in just explaining exactly what it is that you need to do, because otherwise we're just going to get to a situation where men have significantly more in their savings. And there was actually, it was a couple of years ago now, but there was a survey done on how much people had in their pensions, and I think women had half the amount that men did, and it was particularly bad in healthcare. Which
Interesting.
I don't know the reasons behind that. I would like to kind of understand why, but I think it's
quite an alarming statistic.
It's really worrying, and I think we definitely need to do more.
Absolutely, definitely. Investing, is that something that anyone can do at any point in their life, or is there a time that is better to start thinking about it?
It's a good question.
I mean, I say can. Obviously, anyone can.
Yeah.
But should, maybe, is the word I should be using. When should people think about that? Because it's so hard to get your head around. I don't get it.
It took me a while.
It's really
understand.
tricky. And do you know what? Throw the crypto stuff in, and it becomes even more. It's just really tricky to understand how any of it works.
Yeah.
So I'm not asking you to kind of explain how it works. Well, I might give you a call tomorrow and you can give it a go. But is there a time that's when is there a particular time that's better to start thinking about this, and a time when you should probably just park it and wait?
I think, like the pension stuff and anything kind of to do with money, obviously the earlier the better, because you're going to get higher returns. You're going to just kind of be putting more away every month or whenever it is. I don't think that there is anyone that shouldn't. I think obviously it completely depends on your financial situation. If you are kind of struggling to get by every month, I wouldn't. I would kind of focus on maybe just putting a tiny little bit away for like an emergency fund, or a rainy day fund, or whatever it is, because investing is risky, and I think people do need to be aware of that. There are, I'm not going to kind of go into the weeds of it, but if you are kind of investing in a fund, there are cautious options and then all the way through to adventurous. So depending on your risk appetite. But even with those cautious ones, there still comes some risk. Your investments can go up, but they can also go down. And I think people need to be aware of that. But I think as long as they're aware of that and know that it's for the long term, it's not I'm going to invest in this 1 week and then next week I'm going to
make 15 grand and withdraw it next year.
Exactly. I think you'd have to be very, very good. Don't think many people do that. But I think if, over 10, 20, 30 years, that's where you're going to see the sort of best return. And it should ultimately be quite boring. Don't check it every day. You know, I made that mistake.
Do you know what? I'm glad you said that, because I think often it's painted in this kind of very frantic fashion, like constantly checking the stock market, the FTSE 100, and you're like, I remember being at school when there was I was about to say a child, that was a weird way to refer to it, a classmate. There was a classmate who would check the stocks. Yeah, like when I was 15, I was like, what is that? You know, you used to get it automatically downloaded on the iPhone, and it was like that app that you were just like, I don't know what that is. There's just loads of numbers and like colours on it. Yeah.
What's their job now?
Really good question. But he was super smart.
Okay.
Went to Oxford. Smart boy. So he
Wow.
he big dreams, and he got there. So
Wow.
was very, but like, yeah, I think that is the sort of stereotype of investing, is checking it, you know, constantly withdrawing, putting it back in. But you're saying that isn't how it should be.
No, I think if it's not your job, don't check it every day. Don't even check it once a week. I mean, I go months without checking like my pension or my ISA or whatever, because you're just going to be upset because the market moves up and it moves down, and you know there's a lot of turbulence going on at the moment. And I think just get into the habit of putting what you can away every single month, and in 10-20 years you'll probably be quite surprised at how much it's gone up by.
And you can get people to manage it for you, can't you?
Yeah,
you don't have to do any of that yourself.
Exactly.
Relinquish your responsibility in that sense.
Exactly.
So, final question for you today. What would your biggest tips be for those looking to create a financially stable future for themselves? I feel like we've been quite skewed towards younger people today. But let's sort of cast the net open a bit more and just go for, you know, anybody who this could apply for, because as you said, it's never too late to start taking action and making a plan.
Yeah.
So what would your top tips be for
so I think the first one is to work out your budget, which is really, really basic, but I think it's something that lots of people fail to do. So literally, how much do you earn a month and how much goes out, and how much do you have to play with, and how much realistically can you put that into savings? I think once you've worked that out, having an emergency fund is so important. So that is, people generally have about 3 months' wages, 3 to 6 months' wages. And that is for, you know, maybe like your roof is broken, or you need to get your roof redone, your car breaks down, you know, for real emergencies. And, you know, you can dip into them for holidays or nice little purchases. But to kind of have that sort of safety net is really, really important. And I would advise, I mean, personally, I didn't start investing until I knew that I had some level of safety where I knew at least a month that I could, you know, pay my bills, essentially. And then I think from there, it's sort of up to you what your goals are. So I think in terms of future, people always think about like a home or a pension. So for older people, it will be how much sort of retirement income you'll have. So lots of options. There's obviously ISAs, which you don't pay any tax on, like any interest or gains that you've made. So there's cash, stocks and shares, and lifetime ISA, and all of those are really, really good options, sort of depending on your sort of situation. And then most importantly, but probably the most boring topic, is pensions. And I think one really good kind of place to start is like consolidating all of them. So if you've worked at kind of multiple places, and then you've kind of started your own thing and you're self-employed, consolidating them all in one place to kind of know what you've got, what you're sitting on, is really, really important. Because honestly, you'll be surprised. I did it a few months ago and I completely forgot about one place that I'd worked. And I was sitting on like a, you know, a decent amount from like 10 years ago, which, you know, it's really, really easy to do. You can just literally, I think the government actually have their own service to do that completely free.
That's helpful.
So that's really, really good.
It's one of those boring jobs, isn't it?
It is.
The ones that you just put off.
Do it on a Sunday afternoon, honestly.
Or do it now.
Exactly. Do it now. You'll thank me later. And I think all of those things are relevant for whether you are employed or you're self-employed. I think probably especially if you're self-employed, because there is obviously a bit more kind of responsibility that comes with that. And I think ultimately for kind of to build a sort of sustainable financial situation for yourself is building those habits and making sure that like it's what works for you. I see so often on social media people really trying to make a difference and getting people to invest and think about their finances, but it will say something like 40% needs, 30% this.
Do you know what? I was going to ask you that. Is that a bit outdated?
I think so. I think 40% needs, I mean, that would barely cover my rent.
Well, so this is what, so I mean, obviously not everybody lives in London, and there are people, but I mean, but the last few years has had an impact on everyone in its own way, whether you're like you said, you could own your property, but your mortgage rate could have increased a horrific amount. Rents have gone up a really scary amount as well over the last few years. So it's really not leaving anyone untouched. But yeah, I mean, yeah,
absolutely. I think it's those sort of things, it really has to work for you. Otherwise it's not going to be sustainable, and it will become a chore having that direct debit every month. And, you know, if you get to the end of the month and you go, wait, I actually can't afford to do the food shop or whatever. That's not what works for you. Kind of play around with it. See, you know, maybe it's not £100 a month. It's like something less or even more. Could be a lot of money. And it really, really has to be personal to you. And I think that is the kind of key point is build the habits, but make sure that you are going to stick to them over the next 10, 20, 30 years.
I think that's a great point to end on. Don't overstretch yourself, but also don't be too conservative either. Like, you know, you earn money to enjoy yourself, so like have fun. I think it's important to remember that there's so much pressure and so many scary headlines sometimes that you can really, when we're back where we started at the beginning, you can work yourself up into a kind of a frenzy about money and oh gosh, what if this happens, what if that happens. But like at the end of the day, you know, we're on earth for a very short time, so take these sensible habits, make sensible decisions. But if you've got some left over and you've saved what you said you would save, and you've spend the you know, go out for a nice meal or do something, like that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And you don't want to kind of build all this money and then just have like be sitting on it and then have loads of money when you're like 65, because I don't know, anything could happen. Like, exactly. You know, you might not want to go to like Mauritius or whatever on your holidays. Like, you do really need to find that balance. And so, yeah, as I say, it's kind of personal to what's important to you and your sort of goals. Yeah.
Thank you. I really enjoyed that chat.
Thank you.
It's like, I think you downplay it a bit when you say, you know, it's you know, it's quite some like, pension bit, it's a boring tip and stuff like. But I actually love talking about finances, and I think it's it's a cool job. Yeah, because history degree to finance journalist. You know, you're doing it for the good King's alumni. Oh, there'll be a lot of people who went to King's College.
Oh, yes.
Huge dental school at King's College. So yeah,
that's very true.
Yeah, big up King's.
Shout out.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
It's been a pleasure.